Ever since I began making these GPU VR performance review videos, you guys have been asking me to test VRChat. I did download and try it out once a long time ago, but got so confused with all the menus, I logged out and never went back. But the requests for VRChat haven't quit coming, and even though casual social games like VRChat aren't really my thing, VRChat has a larger active player base than any other VR game out there, so I can't deny that it makes a lot of sense when testing GPUs in VR that I should test the game that the most users play. So here we go. Being a total noob to VRChat, I don't even know where to begin, so I'm going to need to rely on you guys for suggestions of worlds and other things to test for future videos. As for this one, I had a viewer in my 5060 Ti video comment about a world called Ritual, and a particular area in that world that is very GPU intensive. I don't know if they just happened upon this world, or if they're the creator of it and wanted me to highlight it in a video, but either way, he wasn't lying when he said this world is very tough on your PC's hardware. As you can see, when using the settings displayed on screen now, when first loading into the world, things are fine. As I walked out this door though, and began moving to the area that had been suggested, performance headroom very quickly dropped off. I don't know what exactly this world is supposed to be, but it kind of reminds me of Meow Wolf, for those of you familiar with that. The area he said that hits the hardest, though, was through this hole in the wall, and as you can see here, the frame rate very quickly drops down into the 30s here, and it doesn't recover for a while, until I get to this little diner. But then again, as I look out the window of the diner, which has some really cool looking lighting effects going on, performance again takes a big hit. So yeah, that's how the 5070 performed at the settings I used in this particular world. Now, I don't think that world is representative of every world in VRChat, so I then tried a couple others. And first I switched over to this world where I'm not sure what it was exactly, but there were some other players there, so I popped in to see what performance would be like. The host of the world kicked me pretty quickly from it, but for the short time I was there, you can see the performance with the 5070 here was really good. After getting kicked, I landed back in my home environment where performance was also really good, and then I found and jumped into this amazing digital circus world because my daughters are big fans of that show, and I thought it would be fun to check it out. Performance here wasn't perfect, but it was definitely better than the first world I tried. There were quite a few other players here as well, so I walked around a bit to check things out. Now, like I said, I'm a total noob to VRChat, so I have no idea what would make for a good test in this game, but I hope for those of you who do play a lot of VRChat that what I've shown here gives you a decent idea how the 5070 performs in this game. And again, please, let me know good worlds to test in, and also if there's other settings I'm not yet aware of that I should be testing. One more thing I should mention is, from what I understand, the speed of your CPU makes a big difference in VRChat, especially in large worlds and when there are other players with highly detailed avatars. My test PC is using a Ryzen 7 9800X3D CPU, which is one of the fastest gaming CPUs available at the time I'm making this video. So if you have a slower CPU, your performance with the 5070 may be very different than mine in this game. Also, if you're curious about the full specs of my test PC and the NVIDIA driver version I'm using for these tests, I've listed them for you in the video description. When I first began testing GPUs in VR, the first racing sim I tested was Assetto Corsa, because it was a very popular game, and also it has a VR benchmark in it that makes testing it really easy to do. But within a year or so, I switched to Assetto Corsa Competizione, because the original Assetto Corsa came out in 2014, and Competizione was significantly newer, so I just kind of felt like I needed to go with the newer game. Well, I recently looked to see which racing sims have the largest player bases, and the original Assetto Corsa's player base is more than 4 times that of Assetto Corsa Competizione, so I've decided to bring the original Assetto Corsa back. Just like I did in past videos, I used the game's built-in VR benchmark for this test, and the RTX 5070 was able to run it at 4192 by 2240 at 90 Hz, with the game settings pretty much maxed out. There were a couple settings that weren't at maximum, but the vast majority of them were, and the game looked great, and the frame rate was solid throughout the entire benchmark. Now, I didn't just up and abandon you Assetto Corsa Competizione players. I tested it as well with the 5070, and I ran it at the same resolution and refresh rate as I did the original Assetto Corsa. But unlike the original Assetto Corsa, I was not able to use the maximum settings. I ended up using the VR High preset, which uses a mixture of high, low, and mid settings, but was also able to bump up the resolution scale from 80% to 100%, which actually sharpened things up a nice little bit. The game looked and played great, and I think anyone looking at the RTX 5070 to do VR sim racing is going to be pretty happy with the performance they can get out of it. I feel pretty confident in saying that because I actually have one more game for all of you sim racers out there, Le Mans Ultimate. Like VRChat, this one was suggested by a fair number of people in past videos, so I bought it and gave it a go. Also like VRChat, I am a total noob to this one. Not that I'm really that experienced in the Assetto Corsa games either, but this is the very first time I'm testing this one, so I am literally just getting acquainted with its settings and everything. So if I'm doing something wrong, please let me know. I tried this game at 2 different render resolutions. I first went with the same resolution and refresh rate I did with the Assetto Corsa games, and using the Ultra Graphics preset in Le Mans, I was able to get a pretty consistent 90 FPS. I did see some performance dips here and there, but overall things were solid. I then decided to try increasing the render resolution a bit to 4704 by 2528 and lowered the in-game graphics preset to high and got pretty similar performance to my first test. Watching these gameplay captures back, I do feel the 4704 by 2528 test looks a little sharper than the 4192 by 2040 test, but in all honesty, in the headsets, they looked pretty much the same to me. A couple other games I ended up playing at 90 Hz were Arken Age and Behemoth. I initially tested Arken Age at 120 Hz, and the game ran well for the most part, but I would also have times where the frame rate would drop down to 60, even when I had a decent amount of performance headroom still available. And there were other times at 120 Hz where textures wouldn't load in, so I'm not sure if those issues were due to the 5070 only having 12 gigabytes of VRAM, or if 120 FPS at 4704 by 2528 and using high graphics settings was maxing out the 5070's 192-bit memory bus, or if there is something else entirely going on. After seeing a similar issue in my 5060 Ti video, I speculated it was the 5060 Ti's 128-bit memory bus that was causing the problem. But recently, a viewer who seems to know a lot more about how GPUs work than I do suggested it may be the amount of L2 cache on the GPU itself that may be the issue. The 5060 Ti is equipped with 32 megabytes of L2 cache, and the 5070 isn't sporting much more at 48 megabytes. No matter what the cause of this performance anomaly is, the fact of the matter is it exists. Thankfully, I've found turning the refresh rate down usually fixes this. In Arken Age, I turned the refresh rate down to 90 Hz and bumped up the render resolution to 5408 by 2912 and set the in-game super sampling to 1.3 to see what would happen, and the game actually ran great. As for Behemoth, it ran great on the 5070 at 90 Hz, ultra graphics settings at a render resolution of 4704 by 2528. But there were some times where I came pretty close to running out of performance headroom at these settings, but overall, the game ran smoothly and the visuals looked awesome. The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners I first ran at 120 Hz at ultra settings, and as you can see, I had a lot of performance headroom still available at these settings. But at the same time, I kept having pretty regular frame drops, so I turned the refresh rate down to 90 Hz, which left me with even more performance headroom. So I then turned up the pixel density to 130% and the anti-aliasing quality to high. So yeah, the moral of the story here is if you want to play The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners with the graphics settings cranked up really high, the 5070's pretty well got you covered. For those of you who watched my 5060 Ti video, you'll remember Beat Saber is the game where I first experienced the frame rate dropping issue while having a lot of performance headroom still available. Well, the 5070 fared better in this game than the 5060 Ti, but I still encountered the same issue. Like I said in my Arken Age test, I'm not 100% sure what the cause of this problem is. Is it the memory bus? Is it the amount of L2 cache on the GPU? Or is there some other single or combination of factors causing this problem? Rather than speculate more on what might be the cause of the problem, I'm just going to show you what I experienced and what I did to circumvent it. I started out testing Beat Saber at 4704 by 2528 at 120 Hz with its graphics settings fully maxed out. And as you can see here, as I would play through a song, the frame rate would drop down to 60, even when I still had 50% or more headroom remaining. After playing around with it a bit, it seems these settings were only just barely exceeding the 5070's capabilities, however, because I found if I turned the in-game render scale down just one notch from 1.8 to 1.7, this problem completely disappeared. So yeah, despite this little issue, as you'd expect, the 5070 provided a great experience in Beat Saber. When I tested Contractors on the 5060 Ti at 120 Hz, I experienced the same performance anomaly that I saw in Beat Saber. It wasn't as pronounced as it was in Beat Saber, but I did still have times where the frame rate would drop when I had a lot of performance headroom still available. Thankfully, I did not experience it in this game with the 5070. I was able to play almost every one of Contractors' maps at 120 Hz, 4704 by 2528 with the in-game settings fully maxed out. I did encounter some areas in a few maps where I ran out of performance headroom and the frame rate would drop down for a little bit, but I found in those maps if I turned anti-aliasing down to medium from high, that gave us enough additional headroom to avoid any frame rate drops whatsoever. Now, Contractors has a lot of mod maps, and of course, it's pretty much impossible to test them all, but in the handful of mod maps I did test, I never had any problems, and they all ran very smoothly with tons of performance headroom still available. Shooters are definitely my favorite type of games to play, and I don't know for sure how popular Forefront is on PC VR, but it's very popular at the moment on Quest, and the 5070 had no problem whatsoever running this game at 5408 by 2912 at 120 Hz. As much as I enjoy this game, I'm still complete rubbish at it, but the 5070 crushes this one without even breaking a sweat.
What's I doing?
The last game I played with the 5070 at 120 Hz was Half-Life Alyx, and it handled this one like a champ, with the render resolution set to 4704 by 2528 and the in-game settings on ultra fidelity. For having come out in 2020, this game never ceases to amaze me at just how gorgeous it looks. I honestly don't know if there's a single game that has come out after that even comes close to looking as good as Half-Life Alyx does. It really is just absolutely phenomenal. I started out testing Alien Rogue Incursion at 90 Hz using the settings you see on screen now, but while it ran fine at 90 Hz, sometimes the frame rate dropped out way too often, so I lowered the refresh rate to 80 Hz, which ended up performing a lot better. Performance still wasn't perfect at these settings, but the frame rate drops were infrequent and short-lived enough. I was happy with this result. Metro Awakening was another game that ran really nice at 80 Hz using the settings I've listed here. During the normal gameplay parts of the game, this gave me tons of performance headroom, but during cutscenes, this headroom would all but disappear, which is why I didn't try to bump things like the anti-aliasing or the resolution scale up any higher. One thing I ran into at these settings, however, is this really annoying white strobing light effect that comes from the NPCs. I felt like that couldn't be the way the developers intended the game to be, so I started playing around with different settings to see what might be causing it. And I found if I set the in-game shadows to low, then this phenomenon would go away, but any setting other than that, and I was being blinded by this. If you watched my last GPU VR performance video about the 5060 Ti, you may recognize that in this footage of Into the Radius 2, I'm picking things up where I left off in that video. Honestly, I don't have time to play any of these games very much. It's only when I'm making these videos I'm able to play them. But yeah, the 5070 did a really nice job running this game at 4704 by 2528 at 72 Hz with the in-game quality settings on high. Like some of the other games I tested in this video, I did not get a perfect 72 FPS all the time, but for the most part, performance headroom stayed above 0, and the game looked great and ran well. I know this video is getting super long, but bear with me, we're almost there. The second to last game I tested was Lone Echo 2, and the 5070 ran this one great at 72 Hz using the game's medium quality settings. I did try running this one using the high quality settings, and at times it ran fine, but at others it was less than fine. So in the end, I decided to go with medium settings. While playing, I did notice times where textures would not load in, but based off my past experience, I don't think that has anything to do with the 5070 or its 12 gigabytes of VRAM, because when I've tested this game before using graphics cards with 16 gigabytes of VRAM and even 24 gigabytes of VRAM, I get the same texture loading issues. If you've played this game before, you know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, you can look online and you'll find that this is a well-known issue with this game. While working on this video, I wanted to see if there was any kind of a fix for this, and I found at one point the community had created their own patch to fix this, but I guess that patch doesn't work on modern versions of Windows 11, and the project has since been discontinued. With the developer of the Lone Echo games, Ready at Dawn, now being closed down, I guess we'll just have to accept this as a feature of the game rather than a bug. Before we take a look at our final game of the lineup, I'd like to insert this chart here for those of you who'd like to see how the 5070 stacks up against other GPUs I've recently tested. If you've watched my 9060 XT and 5060 Ti videos, you've seen this chart before, but it shows the performance of the 10 different GPUs I've tested in the Superposition VR benchmark. And as you can see here, the 5070 slots right in between the RX 7900 GRE and the RX 9070 XT. It also comes in 21% faster than the previous generation 4070 Super and 18% slower than the RTX 4080 in this benchmark. If you'd like to see how your rig stacks up against my results, the scores and frame rates for each GPU were averaged over 7 benchmark runs, and I used a per-eye resolution of 2064 by 2208 with the shaders quality set to VR Future and the texture quality to high. Okay, and now on to the final game in our lineup, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Like I always do, I started out with the game settings at their lowest values, and the 5070 was able to keep our frame rate above our target of 72 FPS without issue in this flight over Sedona, Arizona, when using a render resolution of 4128 by 2208. Switching to the New York City Discovery flight at the same settings, things were a little shakier, but overall, the frame rate stayed above 30 FPS, which in Flight Simulator actually doesn't feel that bad. Keeping the render resolution and refresh rate at the same levels, I cranked up the in-game quality settings to Ultra and the anti-aliasing to TAA just to see what kind of performance we'd end up with. In the Sedona, Arizona flight, the visuals looked amazing, and we got a solid 36 FPS. The New York City flight, on the other hand, got a bit rough. we started out at around 15 FPS, which did not feel good at all. So I changed the anti-aliasing from TAA to NVIDIA DLSS Super Resolution and then set the mode to auto, and that gave us a much more tolerable frame rate just above 30 FPS. The visuals using DLSS look a bit blurrier to me than running other anti-aliasing modes, but I kind of expected that since DLSS is an upscaling technology, which means it's running the game at a lower resolution and then using a form of AI to increase the resolution of the image. So because of that, it's not going to look as sharp in VR as something that is rendered at the actual higher native resolution. Having just finished testing the 5060 Ti coming into this video, I was very impressed by the VR performance of the RTX 5070 as it was significantly more powerful. But at the same time, the MSRP of the 5070 is over $100 more. So for that kind of premium, you'd expect it to be more powerful. Doing the math on it, when comparing the results I got in the Superposition VR benchmark, the 5070 is 45% faster than the 5060 Ti 16GB, and the MSRP is only 28% more. So the 5070, when compared to the price of the 5060 Ti 16GB, is a good value. Unfortunately, at the time I'm making this video, both of these GPUs are currently selling for a good $100 over their MSRPs, muddying the waters a bit. But if you already own an RTX 5070 and are watching this video simply to find out how it performs in VR, well, now you know the answer to that question. It's pretty darn good. Come on, do it. You know you want to. Subscribe.